So good morning, we're speaking with Chant, who has very extensive research in public sector IT, government IT, one of the original visionaries behind what is now the G Cloud. Chris, you're a very informed commentator. Can you tell us, bring us up to speed about what you're up to now?
Okay, I mean, nowadays I spend most of my time in retirement in France, working harder than I've ever worked, that's for sure. But I also do a little bit of work with Rainmaker solutions, helping public sector organisations find their way through transformations of their IT estate and the complexities that brings.
Is Rainmaker a vendor or your own consultancy?
Certainly not my own consultancy. It's a vendor that's on G Cloud and is made up of the guys that help me in the main, help me bring G Cloud into being. So a guy called Tim Hanley, Yanya Bear and Mike Bateman, very experienced in G Cloud, very experienced in the public sector and transformations. So
maybe we're showing our age, Chris, by talking G Cloud. Perhaps we should start saying digital marketplace. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's fine. However you want to call it, and as long as people buy it, that's the thing. It's a complicated thing. The transformation of government IT, one of the most complicated IT programs, if you like, because there are so many cultural issues to overcome in the public sector at a time when they're under enormous pressure, particularly their senior leadership teams under enormous pressure to transform their services in so many ways at much lower cost. So it's a very complex and difficult time, and skills are not abundant in this area, and government and the public sector don't pay as well as many organisations can.
In the past, you've been had some very effective input into what you see, I think, as some of the kind of unfair pricing or exorbitant pricing, perhaps, not to put too strong a word in it. And, you know, we have the concept of the oligopoly. Some commentators are kind of convinced that's beginning to come to an end. What's your feeling?
Yeah, I think it must be. It's just hard. You know, somebody once said if you drag an iceberg into the Caribbean, it still takes a long time to melt. And that's the sort of analogy for me on this. There's some very long contracts in place. Prices are horrendous in that space. I mean, truly. I listened to Tony Singleton this morning at the Think Cloud event, and Tony said they seeing savings of up to 90%. You know, so and that doesn't surprise me. I always remember we rejigged the desktop IT at GDS just before I left, and in an exec directors meeting with as it was then Sir Gus O'Donnell. He said, "Oh, what have you been up to?" And we said we'd redone this desktop, and he said, "Well, it was that expensive?" And I said it had saved 80% of the costs, and he said 18%. That's amazing. And I said no, 80. At which point he really didn't know what to say and moved on. So I think there's a piece that's about disbelief in this and what can be saved, but it's huge money.
So saving has always been a motor for G Cloud Digital Marketplace. You know, what is it now? 2-3 years into Cloud Store, kind of, you know, looking at it as I said, an informed observer. What's your kind of feeling of the temperature of the patient here?
Right. I think, of course, we'd all like it to go faster. A lot of comparisons are made with the total amount spent on IT in the public sector versus what's been spent so far on G Cloud. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, this stuff is much cheaper. We're not looking to spend what we spent. The whole idea would be for me to spend around about 15% maybe of what we were spending before. So if you look at those figures, then the G Cloud spend is not so shabby, and I think if I did anything, this is around the pace that I expected. Okay. But if I did anything, it was underestimating the complexity of the transformation and the shortage of skills in that area. It's quite tough to find people who can take on that sort of transformation. It's, as I say, it's not been done a lot before, certainly not on the scale of government and the private sector as a whole.
GDS would be a central player to this. How do you see their contribution?
Brilliant. And they're doing what they should be doing, which is enabling and not trying to do everything. But that's quite complex, and people like Liam Maxwell and Mike Bracken have done a really good job of getting that line right around enabling. Would we want it more enabled? Yes, absolutely. You know, and they're trying to do that. So I think they're the right vehicle for it. And you know, as we pass over time and these contracts come up for renewal, so we'll see the differences being made.
As a kind of a tough Russian judge from the sidelines, you seem to be giving this process a pretty high mark.
I think so. I think if it, like I say, if you take into account the complexity of it, I think it's not too bad at all. It's good to see now, after the first report, the Labour's digital government report, which some dubbed the Fujitsu report, I think, at the time. It's interesting to see now how they've finally worked out that this is the pretty much the right way of doing things. I'm sure they'll want to draw some differences, but I think we're on the right track. It is complex, and it will happen now. The greatest advantage for G-Cloud was to be born in the middle of you know, an austerity period, and I think the sort of things we've seen in the autumn statement, ministers and permanent secretaries in particular need to look towards what can be done in the IT transformation space, because not only will it reduce the cost of IT, which is obscene, it will also through the work GDS have done around the digitisation of services, create dramatic savings and improvements for end user taxpayer engagement in all of this, which will again roll on to enormous savings for those departments.
Why do I keep reading surveys, Chris, that tell me that local government guys don't know anything about G-Cloud?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. I mean, I remember nobody wanted to put G-Cloud into the wider public sector when I did it. In fact, they actively sort of told me that we shouldn't be doing this, which we as a team just ignored and went on and did. We have a lot more control, or government has a lot more control over what goes on in central government than it does in the wider public sector, particularly local authorities. But I think we need to take into account as well that local authorities have done their IT much more efficiently than central government have done over the last 15 or 20 years. And I think so changing away from that is not quite the size of or the intensity of burning platform that it is around central government. Still needs to be done, and there are still big savings to be made, but I don't think that intensity is quite there. So it'll be a slower burn, but I think there's a lot in G-Cloud that will help local authorities and vendors to local authorities, importantly too. If
we really embrace the digital marketplace and we adopt that kind of mindset, and you've talked about the difficult transformation, this is a real stumper of a question. Have we seen the end of the era of the big government IT disaster?
Well, I think you know, if we adopt this approach, we won't be able to have the big government IT disaster, because we won't be doing big projects like that. That will help that.
Yes.
I think by the nature, I mean, there are some things you know that if you look at the public sector as a whole, there are some things you can't do particularly iteratively. Some of the control systems like air traffic control and the like are very difficult.
Mission critical.
Yeah, mission critical. Yeah, really, truly mission critical stuff like that. And I don't mean the other systems.
No.
So there's always challenges still there. But this should really dramatically reduce those sort of things we've seen before. And frankly, many of the things we haven't seen before too.
As a final question for today, what is your specific recommendation to the public sector buyer or potential buyer of G-Cloud who hasn't really engaged with it yet?
Well, you better get a bloody move on, I mean, would be my advice, because you haven't got the money. You shouldn't be spending that money now. Your services generally are not what they should be, not fit for purpose in the world we're in today, both from a user centricity point of view and a cost point of view. So you better get on and do that. And if you're a perm sec or you're a council leader or whatever in the police or health. If you don't think you've got the right people in there, you better go about getting the right people in there, because that's critical. The leadership of these transformations is absolutely critical, and those skills are what you've got to get in place to make this happen.
Let's have a final supplementary question, because you mentioned the skills thing a couple of times, and perhaps we haven't focused on that. You think there's a skills gap, Chris?
Absolutely. I mean, you tell me, if you look at something the size of DWP. Go and point out to me the plethora of people that have done a transformation from that sort of IT provision to one that is more appropriate now for the years coming up. They're just not about, and they're in very short supply. Even quite in comparison to DWP, even quite modest departmental transformations are complex things. And the likes of Mike Bracken and the work he did at the Guardian before he came into government, those people are still thin on the ground, and the private sector, quite rightly, is snapping up those people and paying good money for them, because they understand. They start to understand exactly what this is all about, and the benefits that it can bring any organisation.
So I get that expertise by talking to a management consultancy?
Well, yeah, you've got to be a little bit careful here. I mean, I think it's a combination of things. You've got to get the leadership people in first, and then they will understand what they've got to do. And they've got to do two things, particularly in government. To get things moving, they're surely going to need to buy in some expertise and this from the private sector, not from big management consultancies, because frankly, I mean, if you want an example, go look at their own systems and see if they've moved those, and if they haven't moved those, then they're really not likely to have the people that can move yours, would be my view. Yes. So there's that, but also at the same time, and critically in parallel, we must start the development of more in-house capability in organisations, and seriously do that. So we're bringing forward that talent, because the scale of challenge that is available in the public sector outstrips most other organisations. And these young guys wanting to get great stuff on their CVs, can do no better than go and engage in a major public sector transformation.
So you'd be supporting Francis Maud's kind of idea of kind of bringing in more professional development, more kind of training in leader skills?
Yeah, well, yes, absolutely. I mean, really, let's be honest. I mean, these large transformations of any sort, the most critical thing is clear leadership from the top. And our permanent secretary, our cadre of permanent secretaries are not really as skilled as they need to be to put in place the sort of transformation that's going on in the public, particularly government and the wider public sector. So we need to look at, first and foremost, at our permanent secretaries and ask ourselves, have we got the right people with the right skills in place? That's where it starts. It always starts. Any transformation in an organisation always starts at the top, and actually if it's not at the top, then it will stumble for a long time until it is.
So it's very much the people side, not just the technology.
Oh, it's absolutely the people side. Technology is just another tool, I can't cut trees without a chainsaw.
But you know what trees to cut.
Hopefully.
Right? Yeah, good one. Thank you very much, Chris. That's fantastic.
Is that all right?
Yeah.